we read about the battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, and how the 4 kings defeated the 5, and how they had taken Lot, Avram's nephew, captive, only to bait Avram that Avram should go to war, and they believed he would be killed. Little did they know that he was the victor. He destroyed them, and initially, one of the 5 kings was the king of Sodom with his community. They were taken captive, and Lot among them. What happens? The Torah tells us the king of Sodom comes to Avram, who's the victor, and he says to him, give me the people, my subjects, and you could take the spoils. Why? Listen what he says. He's dictating the terms. You saved me from being killed by the kings. Shilu Horgu Osi, because if they would have killed me, they would have taken my soul and my material possessions. Tolachos Mamoni. Now you take my money. Shitzaltoni. You deserve my material assets because you're the victor. At that moment, Avram took an oath, and he says, Haramusi Yodi Yodi, I swear to God. Now, he says to the king of Sodom, I will not take as much as a thread or a bootstrap from you. Why? Because God promised me he will make me wealthy. Because when I left Ur Kasdim to go to Canaan, he said to me, he said, he will bless me. All the material blessing come from him. If I should take any of your material, you shouldn't say Ani Asharti Avram. You will say, I made Avram wealthy. And therefore, Avram says, I take an oath, I will not take as much as a thread from you, because God said he will make me wealthy. And I don't want you to claim that my wealth is attributed to you, it's attributed to Hashem. Okay? Firstly, at this point, Avram had tremendous wealth. Avram went to Egypt, and he came back with great wealth, as it says. They were laden with tremendous wealth, and the land couldn't carry both of them. And that caused the dispute between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot. He was already wealthy. Seemingly, the promise of I will make you wealthy already was fulfilled. So gaining a little more wealth, does it really make that much of a difference? So the only way to understand is maybe because the wealth, if he would take the spoils of Sodom, it's the spoils of a whole community. It's a whole nation. That's another level of wealth. Meaning the wealth he came back was as an ordinary wealthy man. But if he would come take the wealth of Sodom as the victor, that wealth will put him at another level, because here he has the wealth of a whole country, a whole community. Therefore, that would be considered, you made me wealthy. So the wealth he took from Egypt is not considered wealth, because, as I said, if he already had that special level of the wealth, that he met that level, so then taking the extra wealth, the king of Sodom can't say, I made him wealthy. Avram already was wealthy. So evidently, the wealth of Egypt wasn't at that level. Taking the wealth of Sodom will put him at another level of wealth. It's like, your Forbes 486. And all of a sudden you come Forbes number 1. It's a different level. Taking the wealth of Sodom, he's on another level, because this is the wealth of the whole country. I will not take as much as a thread, a bootstrap, because I don't want you to say that you made me wealthy when God says the wealth will come from me, because otherwise we have a problem. How did Avram have a right even to take the wealth from the king of Egypt? Same thing. God said he will make me wealthy, not the king of Egypt. Evidently, that wealth over there is not the wealth which the degree of wealth that Hashem was speaking about. Not the wealth of just a wealthy man. It was one kind of wealth that we recognized by the world. It's that special level of wealth. Therefore, I will not take the wealth from you to say that you made me wealthy. That's one approach. Well, one thing for sure, it wasn't that wealth, that special level of wealth, because evidently he would have taken the wealth from the king of stone. Or maybe we would say that the king of stone was so evil, he will take credit even for the wealth that he didn't give Avraham. I made him wealthy. His totality, his status is because of myself. And because he's an evil man, he doesn't want anything to do with the man. Therefore, he took an oath, not as much as a thread or a bootstrap. I was thinking, the reason why Avraham was agreeable to take the wealth from Egypt, because it was clear that came from Hashem. Why? Because initially, when he went to Egypt, he presented Sari Menu as his sister. The wealth, miraculously, believing it was his sister, so it was due to his own initiative, he had the wealth. It's only because Paro recognized, after he recognized that it was Avram's wife, why did Avram take back the wealth? Paro should have taken it back. It was under false pretenses. He gave it a dowry because he believed Sarah was Avram's brother's sister. Now knowing the truth, why did he take it back? Because how did it come about that Paro recognized that she was a married woman? Because the miracles that took place in his palace. He was smitten by the angel when Sarah said, smite, he was smitten. Afterwards, he was so overwhelmingly impressed with what happened. His daughter Hagar was a princess. He said, better she should be a slave woman and the house of Avram than a princess in my palace. So he recognized clearly that what happened was definitely the hand of Hashem. Because otherwise it couldn't have happened. Once he was impressed, he didn't see himself making Avram wealthy. He saw it as a privilege that Avram should take his wealth, that he should somehow identify with Avram, because we see that he gave his daughter as a maidservant in Avram's house by saying, better that she should be a maidservant in Avram's home than a princess in my palace. Okay? What was the schar? What reward did he receive for saying that it would not take as much as a thread or a bootstrap? So the Midrash says differently than the Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara says in Chulin, in the merit of saying, I will not take a thread, we merited the mitzvah of tzitzis. In the merit of the bootstrap, we merited the strap of the tefillin. Tzitzis and tefillin, that's what the Gemara says. The Midrash says differently. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ato Marto Imichut, since you said you will not take a thread now, the altar in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash was location for atonement. Now, one brings different types of sacrifices. You have sacrifices which are known as Kochi Kadoshim, the more advanced level of consecration for the altar. And those are sacrifices which come for atonement, such as the sin offering, the guilt offering. Those are sacrifices for atonement. Then you have other sacrifices, or the Ola, the burnt offering, but you have a peace offering. You have a thanks offering. That is a lesser level of consecration, although the sacrifice is associated with the altar. Now, part of the ritual of the sacrifice to bring about atonement, whatever level it is, you have to sprinkle blood. Now the question is, where do you sprinkle the blood? Now, the altar had an indentation in it which encircled the Mizbeach, the altar. You had the upper above that line and below the line. That line was called Chut HaSikra. It was called the red line. It was an indentation and it was marked with a red, filled in with a red color, and they could identify what was the upper part of the altar, what was the lower part of the altar. Based on the type of sacrifice you would bring, some sacrifices you would sprinkle above that line, and some sacrifices you would sprinkle below that line, when you would sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on the altar. And that would determine atonement. If you do it wrongly, one's not atoned. So Hashem says it was called Chut HaSikra. Chut is a thread. in the merit that you said you will not take as much as a thread from him, you will merit the chut hasikra on the mizbeach, the line of demarcation, which determines what's the upper part, the lower part. You will merit that line. What is that line determined? Whether you're atoned or not atoned. Above the line for one level of atonement, below that line for another level of atonement. That's the measure for measure. Not as much as a thread. Now, why did he want to take as much as a thread? Since the king of stone represented evil, and he would say he made Avraham wealthy, which would be a desecration of God's name. Therefore, God says, because you didn't want to be associated to any degree, not to go near it, therefore I will give you reward, which will be a full reinstatement for your children. Because that chut hasikra, that line of demarcation on the mizbeach, which is called chut, the line will determine whether you're atoned or not atoned. That will allow you to be atoned properly. V'od, b'schar shamarta imichut, another mitzvah I'm going to give you, mitzvahs chutin shal mitzvahs psil tcheles. We find that the tzitzis, they're called strings, but you put the dye of the tcheles on it. It's a certain type of dye. It's the blood of a certain type of snail, which comes out of the sea every 70 years. And why this color? So the Gemara says, because this color reflects the heavens, which ultimately reflect the heavenly throne. So when you look at the tzitzis, and when you have that dye on some of the strings, you have a cognizant of God's presence. Because you don't want to take that string from him, which will distort truth, because it will be attributed to his evil source. Therefore, your children will merit a mitzvah, which has a color, which will always allow them to have a cognizance of my presence, which is psil tcheles. It's tcheles. It's not just tzitzis, it's tcheles. It's that special color which reflects the color of the what? Of the kisei hakavod, of the heavenly throne. Omart atzroch now. You would not take a bootstrap. The bootstrap of the nal means a shoe. If a man doesn't want to perform levirate marriage, so the widow of the surviving brother takes off the shoe and she makes a declaration. Now, when we left Egypt, what does it say? We ate the Pesach, the Paschal lamb. This is when the 10th plague was taking place. It says, you should be ready to leave Egypt. It says, Na'lechem b'raglechem. You're wearing your shoes. Normally, a person eats at home. You're like in a leisurely state. You take off your shoes, you relax. When they ate the Paschal lamb in this sequestered location during 10th plague, you have to be in a position ready to go. Na'lechem b'raglechem. To indicate you were going to break from that evil location. That was the redemption from Egypt. V'od nifra meisa. In the merit of saying, I will not take the bootstrap of the shoe, that will cause Esav to be destroyed. Why? There's a verse in Tilim. David says, Al Edom ashlach nali. God says, I will take my shoe and throw it on Edom, which is an indication they're going to be cast off. And the merit. So the ultimate ability to rid ourselves of the Edomite exile, that's the merit of Avraham saying, I will not take the bootstrap of the shoe. Because you can see it's unbelievable. The amount of mitzvahs that saying that he will not be associated with anything which has any representation of evil. Edom personifies evil. That's Esau. He's the counterforce to Yaakov, who represents good. In the merit of saying you don't want to be associated with anything which is evil, which is the king of stone, in that merit, I will take my shoe and throw it and crush Edom with that shoe, the Edomites. V'od, in addition, I will praise you, children. There's a verse in Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs. How beautiful are your paces when you wear your shoes. I mean, when the Jews ascended to the Temple Mount 3 times a year during the festivals to enter into the sanctuary to bring their sacrifices, God says, how beautiful are the paces of the Jewish people when they walk in their shoes. God says, I value those shoes. He refers to Nalayim. Why do I focus on those shoes? Well, since Avraham Avinu said, I don't want to be so sick, take that bootstrap of the shoe. Any relevance to that, therefore, I will value those paces of the Jewish people when they ascended the Temple Mount. You detested. You did not want to take any payment from the mortal. Therefore, you have enormous reward. You have an enormous level of worthiness. So it's interesting. King Solomon says, Soni matonas yichya. The one who despises gifts, he will live. He will live. What does that mean? Meaning it's better not to take a gift. Why is it so important not to take a gift? He'd say you take a gift from someone, he controls you. That person controls you. But it says yichya. Now, we know that there's a mitzvah for a Jew to emulate God. I always mention the Maral. Maral of Prague says, Moshe says to the Jewish people, when you cleave to God, you'll be attached to the source of life continuously, because God is the source of all life. So when you attach yourself to the source of life, now, what is the determining factor whether you could cleave to God or not? You have to assume his characteristics. Rachmin, he's merciful, he's gracious, he's giving, he's this, he's that. God never receives anything from anyone. God's always on the giving end, never on the receiving end. So being on the giving end, not taking gifts, you should be the benefactor. Don't be the beneficiary. Like God, we're beneficiaries of God. God is the creator. But in terms of any other mortal, Baruch Hashem, we have Hashem. Hashem's my patron. Hashem supports me. Hashem is my benefactor. I don't need the mortal to be my benefactor. That's Soni matonas yichya. So Hashem says to Avraham, because you tested and did not take the gift, although you were the victor, you had a right to it. But factually, you relied on me, therefore you have enormous reward, unlimited reward. Because since you emulated me in my totality, as I'm never on the receiving end, you don't want to be on the receiving end, therefore, you're going to receive this tremendous amount of reward in the future. So we see this encounter with Avraham, the few things he said. Here, Avraham is a holy man. You'd say, for him to say, I won't take a thread, I won't take a bootstrap. I don't want you to say you made me wealthy. I mean, taking a thread, bootstrap, is that called making me wealthy? The answer is, you know something? The evil inclination is so wily and so deceiving. The moment it gets into your head, you never know where it'll go with that. You know, you close the door. As they take, there's an expression in English, you give a finger, you take a hand. That's the way it is. You let him, if you allow yourself to take a thread, a bootstrap, you don't never know where that ends up. No, that means you're already connected. Once you're connected, you feel I have a right. I have a right to take this. Once I have a right to, I have a right to take more. You become vulnerable to what? To that area of existence. Avraham understands, I don't want to go near it. Not as much as a thread. Because the thread, what that represents is this evil, I want no association with it. And what is the tzitzis? It's a reminder. It says, when we look at the tzitzis, it's a positive command. Risimos of the third paragraph of the Shema, we say, and when you look at them, uschartem is mitzvahs Hashem. When you look at the tzitzis, you remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. You can cognizant. You're able to internalize them. What did the thread of Sodom represent? Everything of defiance, to be defiant against God, because you did not want to take that thread which represents everything which is the antithesis of God. I will give you a thread which is the tzitzis, which will allow you to be continuously cognizant of Hashem, to be touched, that you're able to internalize God's presence. That is really the measure for measure. But it's interesting, the Chut HaSikra, the line of demarcation on the Mizbeach, on the altar, which separates between the upper part and lower part, which is the basis, whether you're atoned or not, because atonement comes through the sprinkling of the blood on the Mizbeach, and the merit of not taking that, you merit atonement. What's atonement? Atonement is reinstatement. When you sin, there's a detachment from God. When you're forgiven, forgiveness means you're reinstated. That line of demarcation on the altar, which is called the Chut HaSikra, the thread, the red thread, that red mark, which is line of demarcation, that will determine whether you reinstate it or not. Here, what that represents is a detachment from God. Because you didn't want to be associated with that, you will merit something which will be the ultimate basis to facilitate the reinstatement of God, which is the attachment to God. That's the Mida Keneged Mida. I mean, we spoke yesterday that the species of the sacrifices, the reason why we have the ox or the calf, why that species atones for us? Because Avraham, when he hosted the angels, the calf was what he used to host the angels. So what was initially the golden calf, which is ultimately the prosecutor of the Jewish people, that same calf, because it was used for the mitzvah of hospitality by Avraham Avinu, was to bring about monotheism, which is the antithesis of paganism. Therefore, we merited that should be the species to bring about atonement.